All right, y'all. Good day, morning, afternoon, evening, late at night, whenever it is you're deciding to watch this on Monday, but it better be on Monday. And happy Monday to you. Welcome to week 14 of our lovely A-Push experience here in the good year 2020. I'm going to start by outlining exactly what I told you in Google Classroom when I posted the assignment on Friday, as well as in my whole A-Push email on Friday afternoon, that this week, probably more than any other week, like this video is going to be vital in you understanding what comes into our live session. So I'm going to urge you to give it the attention it deserves. I'm going to urge you to answer those questions thoughtfully and carefully. And I'm going to urge you to, as needed, use your textbook, use this video to make sure that you come into the live session really ready to go for what comes next as we careen towards civil war. But for today, we're going to pick up right where we left off at the end of the Mexican-American War with the Mexican Secession, as they cede to the United States after the war for $15 million via the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. That land that makes up modern-day California, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, parts of Utah, Nevada, and agree to what had already been settled via treaty that Texas was independent and now is part of the United States. So we're going to pick right up there. And the next 6 years, a whole lot of craziness happens. And I'm going to cover all of it today. In the next 6 years, we're going to create a compromise that temporarily settles things down and then create a new law, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, that reignites the sectional passions, tensions, and fury between North and South. But I'll pick up at the end of this in our live session with the consequences, the next steps of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So today we're just hitting 1848, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, to 1854 with the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And then we'll look at the real carnage and legacy of that in our live session. So first of all, as the Mexican-American War winds down, a presidential election takes place. Obviously, happens every 4 years, whether or not you like it. And James K. Polk, it chooses not to run again. He always intended to be a one-term president. He really did come for westward expansion and accomplish westward expansion. You can make an argument that James K. Polk is the most successful president of all time at achieving what it is he set out to achieve, right? I'm not saying he's the best president, the most effective president, any of that. But in terms of like checking the boxes he said he would check, he checks all the boxes. Lowers the tariffs, Democrats are happy. Westward expansion, manifest destiny, Democrats are happy. Settles the Oregon border, Democrats are happy. So all the promises that he made, refuses to allow a national bank, Democrats are happy. So in terms of campaign promises that turn into action, there's few presidencies that rival what Polk was able to accomplish. Granted, much of it by force via the Mexican-American War, but he promised to spread in California, and that's exactly what he did. So he steps down after his one term, and what we see in 1848 is a unique election in that we have Zachary Taylor as a Whig. You might remember him as the general whose actions started the Mexican-American War. He's the one who sent to that disputed territory on the Texas border where he's fired upon, and Polk can say, "American blood on American soil, Congress declare war." So he's a war hero. He cashes in on that war hero legacy of his to run for president, even though he has a very, 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 very minimal political background. All of his background is military, not political at all. He's a slave-owning Whig. He's unique, though, in that he's a slave-owning Whig that is not in favor of the expansion of slavery. So I'll leave that there for a little bit. Democrats run Lewis Cass. As their Democratic candidate. And this new party, right? This is going to be the start of what really is going to carry us through the next 12 years. This new party pops up called the Free Soil Party, and they're going to nominate our old friend, Martin Van Buren, who, as you know, was Jackson's vice president for Jackson's second term. He serves as president after Jackson for his one term, which was, of course, disrupted by the Panic of 1837, which made things quite difficult on him and his popularity. He's then beaten by William Henry Harrison in the election of 1840, who then dies a month later from pneumonia. Anyway, Van Buren is back, and he's back running as a free soil candidate, And what that means is his party is not in favor of abolishing slavery by any means, but they are pro limiting the expansion of slavery. The free soil ideology says slavery's cool where it exists, right? The whole South and Texas, slavery's fine there, but all this open territory that the US has now conquered or bought or settled, all conquered, all this territory the US has now conquered, that land should be left available for non-slave holding individuals. Because the concern is always the plantation style economy that we talked about 2 weeks ago, that in a plantation style slave dominated society, the rich that own all the slaves have access to all the land and gather up all the good land. And that doesn't leave enough for the yeoman farmer, right? The everyday kind of person that wants to spread out west and have a new opportunity. So the free soil ideology is important, and they form from this ideology, they form a party called the Free Soil Party. They run Martin Van Buren for president here in 1848. And this party is going to break away from the pro-slavery Democratic nominations. Now, you may remember that Martin Van Buren is a Democrat, right? Before this, he serves as Jackson's vice president and a Democratic president. So Northern Democrats who are anti-expansion of slavery, right? Maybe the working class in the Northeast, right? The laboring factory industrial class. Northern Democrats who are anti-expansion of slavery are going to leave the Democratic Party because the Democrats keep nominating crazy pro-expansionist, pro-slavery expansionist candidates like Polk, like Lewis Cass. So because they're going to leave the Democratic Party, they're going to vote free soil. When you split a party like that, even though it's only 300,000 votes that Van Buren achieves or earns, those 300,000 votes are largely in the states of New York and Pennsylvania. Right here, I'm circling for you. New York and Pennsylvania. So as you can see, really important states in terms of the Electoral College. These are the two most populous states at the time. Now, in a very, very close election, these 200,000 votes that come from New York and Pennsylvania are going to siphon off enough support for Cass that Taylor the Whig wins both of those states, even though both states had largely been Democratic before that. Taylor the Whig earns both states, and Whigs win the presidency behind Zachary Taylor in 1848 and going forward. What that means now is the Whigs have now elected two presidents, both of whom were war heroes. William Henry Harrison, remember Old Tippecanoe from the War of 1812, and now Zachary Taylor as the Whig president from the Mexican-American War. But what this foretells us is that there's enough people that are questioning the future of slavery, specifically expansion-wise, to leave their parties, that the parties in the second party system are beginning to crack under the weight of slavery. Now, as you know, at the very tail end of the war, David Willmot, Democrat from Pennsylvania, who later would be a free soiler, is going to propose the Willmot proviso, right? And he says that, and we talked about this at the very end of class last week, but I want to make sure it was here again because it really starts all this chaos, that acquiring any territory from Mexico, anytime if we're going to acquire any of this territory from Mexico at the end of the war, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall ever exist in any part of that territory. So his argument is, if we didn't fight the war to spread slavery, then why are we not trying to spread slavery there? You can always associate the Willmot proviso with this free soil ideology of letting slavery stand where it is. He's fine with it in Texas. It already exists in Texas, but nowhere else should we allow slavery to expand. Now, the proviso is going to pass very easily in the House of Representatives, right, by 5 votes. Not very easily, but it passes comfortably by 5 votes in the House of Representatives, which makes sense because the House of Representatives has more northern support because it's based on population. And as you know from our last couple classes, more people live in the north. That's where the cities are. It's where the industrial jobs are. It's where the immigrants are coming. So the House of Representatives passes the Willmot proviso, but it gets defeated in the Senate, which makes a lot of sense because in the Senate, every state has the exact same representation. So there's no added benefit for population. So the South has more support, more backing in the Senate because it's not based on population. So regardless, the proviso doesn't go anywhere. It never gets passed, but it comes to represent the Southern slave power fear that Northern politicians are coming to get rid of slavery. It also is going to fracture Northern Democrats into 2 competing groups. One group that's anti-proviso that will stay Democrat. One group that's pro-Willmot proviso that will then be more likely to join the Free Soil Party because it backs up that same ideology. So the Free Soil Party's creation and the Willmot Proviso really go hand in hand in understanding this free soil ideology. Right here we have in 1848 this election in which we see the Whigs, the Whig harmony. The Whigs are going two different directions. It's a good cartoon. Right during the election, as we see Zachary Taylor, who ends up winning the presidency, going this way towards the White House with our old friend Henry Clay, going the other direction. Right, and they're obviously in this case fighting over the future of the Whig Party. And there's the key issues the Whigs have always cared about: the tariff, the bank, internal improvements, Clay's American system ideology here again. Right, and then here comes David Willmot putting a rock there to to throw off the. It just goes to show that the Willmot Proviso throws like a wedge into our political system as it forces politicians, Democrats and Whigs, to either support or not support this proviso, and thus make their opinions very clear on their opinion on the expansion of slavery. Now, meanwhile, while this is happening, America is going through significant economic and demographic changes as the market revolution continues. We're seeing waves of immigrants that we've talked about at the end of period 4, specifically Irish immigrants due to the potato famine in Ireland in the 1840s. They're going to mostly settle in northeastern urban centers like Boston, like New York City, like Philadelphia. We're seeing a huge wave of German immigrants that are coming to the old Northwest Territory, the northern states west of the Appalachians. And then we're also going to see California's gold rush, we'll talk about in a second, is going to cause America's real first immigration wave from somewhere other than Europe. As we're going to see a huge increase in Chinese immigrants. They're going to come looking to strike it rich in the gold rushes of California. Right? And this immigration wave is going to create a huge amount of unskilled labor. And this doesn't mean that people don't have skills. It's just the jobs they're going to do are considered unskilled jobs, right? Factory jobs, mining jobs, right? Manual labor type jobs. Right? And this provides strong base of low wage, cheap labor in northern factories, in northern internal improvement projects like railroads and canals and these infrastructure things that are being built more so in the north. With some skilled labor coming as well, factory-wise, mostly from Germany. They're going to contribute to the ongoing and continuing economic advances of the nation. But keep in mind that almost all of this influence is going to be confined to the north, as the north is where the opportunities are, factory-wise, farm-wise, et cetera. These immigrants are going to mostly vote Democrat. They're going to mostly vote Democrat. And anti-immigrant sentiment in the 1840s and then 50s is going to lead to a huge increase in nativism, anti-immigrant sentiment. Eventually, even a political party's formed, the Know Nothing Party or the American Party, a secret-ish political party, which is why they call themselves the Know Nothings. Right? They're asked about this party. Oh, I know nothing. Which is going to be a party that's really defined just on being anti-immigrant. Right? We see here immigration in the 1840s and 50s really picks up, specifically from Ireland and from Germany. Right? These diagonal lines are Germany. The dotted bar graph part is Ireland. But we also see a big increase from Great Britain as well as other countries. Right? This is going to account for like the Chinese immigration and elsewhere. So America is becoming a much more heavily immigrant country, which leads to nativism. Right? This belief in that immigrants are dangerous and subversive to America. We start seeing these flags much more frequently, which is going to be interesting, I think, to all of us. As it says, Native Americans, beware of foreign influence, right? To which actual Native Americans are like, yeah, obviously, look at the situation that we're in, right? It's interesting that they've co-opted this phrase Native Americans to imply native-born Americans. We don't see Native Americans being used to talk about actual Native Americans, indigenous peoples, for another 100 or so years. So this nativist movement is going to be very anti-immigration for really one main reason, and that's anti-Catholicism. This belief that the Pope has some sort of worldwide pull on power, and he's trying to spread Catholicism everywhere so the Pope can take over the world. This Romanist conspiracy theory, and this fear that if all these Catholic immigrants come to America, they're going to be more loyal to the Pope than they will to the American political institutions. This nativist movement is going to be very attractive to white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, like the old guard of America. So it's going to gather quite a bit of traction with that element of America. And it'll eventually formulate into an actual political party, the American Party or the Native American Party. which will play a small role in politics, but it just goes to show like the way demographics are changing, specifically in the North. Now, another big demographic changing factor that's going to fuel other changes is the California gold rush. Now, gold is found in 1848, January 24th of 1848 in Northern California. And that's going to lead to a massive migration of people really from all over the world to California to try to get rich, right? We see these steamships advertising a way to get to California as fast as possible, right? This is from the East Coast. It's going to take 35 days, right? 35 days to get from the East Coast all the way to California. They're going to take this steamship to Central America. They'll take 200 donkeys, or jackasses is what it says, right across the narrowest part of Central America, hop on a new ship, head up north, and go get gold, right? This movement becomes known as the 49ers, San Francisco 49ers, because this big wave of immigration really comes in 1849. And just in 2 years, we see San Francisco as a city grow 5 times, 500% increase from 1848 to 1850. So all these people come to California looking to get rich on gold. And I want to remind you, same thing I told you the very, very, very beginning of the year, we talked about colonization. Right? Who migrates? Not rich people. Right? Rich people don't up and leave to get rich because they're already rich. So likewise, who's coming to California is a very, very diverse, eclectic mix, right, of industrial workers, Chinese immigrants, free African Americans from northern states. A variety of eclectic mix of people is coming to California, and for the most part, none of them rich. Now, sadly, very, 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 very few people actually get rich in the California gold rush. Ironically, everyone gets very excited about it, but in comparison to what some gold findings that comes later, it's not that much gold. The person that gets the richest off the California gold rush is a small tradesman who starts getting rich selling equipment and clothing to all the people that are coming to California to get rich on gold. And his last name is Levi. Levi's Jeans to this day, still centered in San Francisco. And he benefits from the gold rush by selling stuff to the people trying to come get rich. And he ends up being the most successful person for the gold rush. And he didn't get any gold at all. Go figure. So California's population increases exponentially right here after the Mexican-American War. And at the tail end of 1849 into 1850, California has enough people to apply to be a state, which is kind of crazy fast because just 2 years ago, it was part of Mexico. So 2 years in, thanks largely to the gold rush, California applies to be a state, and they apply in their state constitution to be a free state, a state with no slavery. If you think about who migrated to California, that makes sense. They're not the rich plantation southern planters. They're just the factory workers, the everyday folks. Chinese Americans, Mexican Americans, European Americans, women, Native Americans, African Americans, a variety of people come, and these people are not the type of people that are going to want to allow slavery in their state because they know what happens with the plantation style economy. So they apply to become a free state. The South says absolutely not. Absolutely not. We refuse to allow slavery from being restricted in any of the territory we got from Mexico. We want to spread slavery there. We will not allow California to come in as a free state. This is going to lead then Northerners to respond, drafting petitions, demanding that slavery is prohibited everywhere in the new territories, again, echoing the Willmot proviso perspective. And for the first time in 1850, so 10 years before it actually happens, in 1850, Southerners are going to talk openly of secession, of saying, all right, if you want to let slavery be abolished in California, then we're just going to leave this country and form our own country. We're going to secede, much like South Carolina threatened to do with the nullification crisis. Even John C. Calhoun, again, says basically like Southern rights need to be respected. And then we will take it that if you refuse to allow slavery in California, that you're going to put slavery on its path to extinction, and we will not stand for that. Southern rights must be protected. Southern rights, at the end of the day, is literally just owning humans at this time. So there's a lot of conflict over California. California becomes a big spark point over this future of slavery question. We need a solution, right? The South's talking about secession. It's getting real heated. It's getting crazy. The Senate's trying to find compromise between North and South. It's a mess at this point. There's a lot of issues that need fixing. It's not just California, but the main issue is California. California wants to be a state. Most people think it would be a slave state because it's largely below the 3630 line. The people of California aren't having that. Neither is the president, Zachary Taylor, who, as you know, because I just told you, is a slave owner who likes slavery, obviously, but he does not believe slavery has any, he doesn't believe in the spreading or the expansion of slavery. All right, so that's problem one. California wants to be a state. They want to be a free state. Problem two, Texas, which is a slave state, is once again, like they did before the Mexican-American War, claiming they have more land than they do. They're claiming their border stretches deep into the New Mexico territory, and that's a very, very Texas thing to do. Third issue, abolitionists, this other group, right, that's more than just anti-expansion slavery, that's just straight up anti-slavery. They want to get rid of slavery in Washington, D.C. because they think it's a blight, it's a sin on America that here in our capital, where we're debating all these important bills and democracy and republicanism and all the foreign dignitaries, right? When visitors like diplomats or officials come from England or from France or wherever, they come to Washington, D.C. to meet with our leaders, and they're slaves everywhere. So abolitionists argue that we have a moral obligation, if we're going to be a model for the rest of the world, to abolish slavery in Washington, D.C. Right? And the South's pissed, South's always pissed, the South's pissed that the North is not enforcing their Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, which is, of course, passed right after the Constitution, which said that if slaves escape to northern places where slavery is abolished, they still need to be returned to their owner because they are property, and thus property rights exist. And even if a state is a non-slave state, that doesn't mean that a slave can go to that state and be free. Because the law still exists nationwide. So South's mad that slaves are escaping to northern states, and the northern states aren't doing anything about it. They're not sending them back. So Henry Clay, our old friend Henry Clay, as we know, the great compromiser, comes up with one last compromise before he dies. First things first, California is admitted as a free state. I put a little star over here because that is in favor of the North. The North wins this round. California comes in as a free state. That's a big deal. But the next piece is going to introduce this idea of popular sovereignty, which means sovereignty means power. Popular means the people. So popular sovereignty is going to say for the whole rest of the land that we have that's not settled, not North, not all the rest of the territories that we just got from Mexico, why don't we just let the people that settle there decide for themselves if they want to have slavery or not, right? That the rest of our territories, modern day Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, all the rest of the space we got from Mexico, we'll just let the people that eventually settle there decide for themselves if they want to have slavery or not, right? And that's a benefit to the South because now they have a new area that they could, in theory, spread slavery to. Third, the slave trade, the buying and selling of slaves, is abolished in Washington, D.C., but not slavery itself. Right? I still argue it's a win for the North, for the abolitionists, because it's a start. The slave trade, so that now there's no more slave markets of open air areas in which people are just literally buying and selling humans. But the fourth piece is a much more effective, much stronger fugitive slave law that's going to actually cause a lot of problems going forward. In exposing slavery's cruelty to northern states. So that's actually a Southern win short term, but it backfires long term because it actually turns more Northerners against slavery when they see the visuals of former escaped slaves being kidnapped out of their neighborhoods and sent back to the South. So that's the solution. That's this proposed solution. Debate is going to rage for months and months and months. Congress is going back and forth. The public opinion, the press is going back and forth. And this really is a turning point in our congressional eras in Congress, which does help us reveal the changing politics in the 1850s. Now, our older leaders who we've been talking about since the 1820s are dying off. Clay, Calhoun, and Daniel Webster will all be dead in the next 2 years. Clay and Calhoun will both be dead this year in 1850. And our new congressional leaders like William Seward, Jefferson Davis, and Stephen Douglas, a name I know you know from your reading, terrible human. And this guy ends up being president of the Confederacy when the South secedes. So another terrible human. But these younger leaders are much more idealistic and passionate for their regional, their selfish interests. So like a Clay, for example, almost at every turn put the nation's best interest first in building and crafting all these compromises. Some would argue he compromised away the presidency by taking too many moderate conciliatory views. This new phase, this new era is going to be dominated by much more selfish, aggressive young leaders who are not putting the country first necessarily, but putting their region, their section of the country first. And that's going to be one of the reasons that leads us to the Civil War. Now, President Zachary Taylor, he dies. We'll talk about why he dies in a minute. But he was an anti-compromise of 1850 because he didn't like the idea that slavery could spread into the rest of the territories. And the new president, Millard Fillmore, delicious name, he becomes president and he's pro-compromise of 1850. So with that transition of power, the compromise gets passed. Life is good. The country is saved from civil war. And then Henry Clay dies. He's done his last good compromise from a lifetime of compromises. Missouri in 1820, the nullification crisis in South Carolina in 1833 with the olive branch and the sword. And then 1850, the compromise 1850 is going to settle the issue of slavery for now in the Mexican Secession. So Zachary Taylor's dead. Another president has died now. That's two in a short time. As we know, he's a war hero. He's a fan of states' rights, but not to the point of secession. In that case, I guess you could say he's kind of similar to Jackson. And his views on slavery is, even as a slave owner, he's anti-expansion of slavery. And for that reason, he refuses to sign or approve of the Compromise of 1850. And then he dies after 1 year in office from basically blowing his stomach up by eating way too many cherries and drinking too much spoiled milk, leading to gastroenteritis, which is a terrible stomach inflammation, and that actually kills him. So moral of the story here, A, don't own slaves, and B, don't eat too much cherries or drink too much milk. It's bad for you. Look at Zachary Taylor, he died. Imagine imagine the president of any more modern time dying from eating too many cherries. It's kind of a crazy thing to think about, but no, this is just 170 years ago. My man died from cherries. Taking his place is this delicious looking man, Millard Fillmore. He takes the presidency after Taylor's death. He's anti-slavery. He's a moderate. He approves of the Compromise of 1850, even though he doesn't love it because he likes the idea that California is included as a free state. And under his presidency, America's going to send Commodore Matthew Perry to Japan to begin trying to establish some trade relationships and some trade routes with Asia. So you see now kind of the consequences of Manifest Destiny is now the U.S. global footprint, global impact is getting larger. So that's it, though. He doesn't have much to do except serve after Taylor dies and agree to the Compromise of 1850. So taking a step back in time, this was our status in 1820. In 1820, this was the Missouri Compromise. This line is going to cut across the rest. We're going to allow Missouri north of this line to have slavery. So the Missouri Compromise. But the rest of the land from the Louisiana Purchase, the rest of the unorganized territory would not have any slavery because of the Missouri Compromise. Now, the Michigan Territory over here, that's no slavery either because of the Northwest Ordinances way back in the day. So that still applies over here. But the Missouri Compromise applies just to the land acquired from the Louisiana Purchase. Slavery can come down here to Arkansas. Slavery cannot go north of the 3630 line. Let's add in the 1850 piece now, right? As of the Compromise of 1850, all this land, sorry that American Experience from PBS changed their colors on you, but all this land is still closed to slavery because the Missouri Compromise still applies to all of this, right? California now comes in as a free state, and the rest of the land stolen from Mexico via the Mexican-American War, the rest of that land is not free or slave. It's, we'll let them figure it out later. Popular sovereignty. When enough people move to New Mexico, move to Utah, and want to become a state, they can decide then if they'll be a slave state or a free state, much like California did when they applied to be a free state. So now you can see the South's like, all right, cool. We can't really spread slavery there. Can't spread slavery there. But now if we need to spread slavery for running out of slave influence, we can spread it here and here, and then have enough votes to make these areas a slave state. So there's a Compromise of 1850. And now, as you know from your reading, the Underground Railroad is functioning, and many slaves are escaping via that and other routes. But the Fugitive Slave Act means that even slaves that get to, say, New York or Pennsylvania or Ohio, that they can still be captured and sent back to their owners because of this new strengthened Fugitive Slave Act. So that's what the South gets, really. That's their big win in this compromise. So the parameters are quite simple. California is a free state. The rest of the Mexican Secession has popular sovereignty. The Fugitive Slave Law is strengthened and reinforced. Texas said they had a bunch of land over here. America says, no, you don't. Shut up. Texas is like, all right, fine. And the slave trade is abolished in Washington, D.C. The slave trade is abolished in Washington, D.C., but not slavery itself. Now, Calhoun says, I trust we shall persist in our resistance. We're going to resist the admission of California until the restoration of all of our rights or disunion. So here he is in 1850 saying the same thing he said in 1832 about the tariff and nullification is disunion. We will break up with this country. One or the other is the consequence. Give us our rights back, or we're seceding. We're leaving the country. We have borne the wrongs and insults of the North long enough. So it's here in 1850 where we really start seeing the talk of secession heat up. But the compromise really does a good job of settling things down short term. Things cool out, things calm down. The North goes back to their ways, the South goes back to their ways, the West goes back to their ways, and everything's cool for a couple of years. But all three of these dudes are dead by 1852, who we called the Great Triumvirate of Clay, Webster, Calhoun. And this new generation is much more sectional, much more in favor of their region of the country, and much more ambitious politically to make a name for themselves. That's going to be one of the things that gets us towards civil war. Now, the biggest consequence of the Compromise 1850 actually is this Fugitive Slave Law, right? This enforcement of capturing and returning escaped slaves, forcing slaves to have to flee all the way to Canada if they want to be free of the tentacles of the slave power. Slaves are denied the right to trial by jury when captured, which means that at times people who are actually free and never were slaves, they're kidnapped by slave catchers without a trial to prove that they were born not in slavery, or that they had bought their slavery or been freed at some point. Sorry, it's the way it works. They're sent back to the South as well. And it leads really to public opinion in the North shifting to a much more anti-slavery perspective, because it exposes to northern cities the cruelty that slavery could impose on society. We see this sign here in Boston: caution, colored people of Boston, one and all. You're hereby respectfully cautioned and advised to avoid talking to police. There's kidnappers, there's slave catchers. Keep a sharp lookout, watch out, they might be coming to get you. All right, next piece, Proclamation, good people of Massachusetts. Be it known that there are now 3 slave hunters and kidnappers in Boston looking for their prey. One of them is called Davis. The next is called Edward Barrett. Watch out for these guys, because if you see them, if they capture you or they arrest you, whether you are a former slave or not, you might be sent back to the South and sold back into slavery. So the Fugitive Slave Act is going to be a big driver of public opinion in the North. Another big driver of public opinion is Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, Uncle Tom's Cabin is published in 1852 by Harriet Beecher Stowe, sister of Catherine Beecher, education activist in the Second Great Awakening, antebellum reforms, and daughter of Lyman Beecher, Second Great Awakening reformist preacher and pro-temperance advocate. Go figure. The Beecher family is full of badass people that are all about changing the country for the better. Now, she writes this book that does a really good job of humanizing slaves, of making readers realize the human element that exists in enslaved families, enslaved dynamics. She writes this book and says, I would write something that would make this whole nation, make the whole country feel what an accursed thing slavery is. Now, the book goes 1850s viral. It's a bestseller in the North. It turns into a bestseller in England. It actually fuels English public opinion against the South, against slavery as well, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. It's a best-selling novel. It gets turned into a play as well, so people are able to see the play. It shows slaves that the reader really gets to know being sold away from their families and beaten cruelly. And the book actually does a ton of good in fueling abolitionist movements and fueling abolitionist rhetoric in the northern free states, because the book is so widely read that it becomes a real big talking point to those that are discussing like the ramifications and the implications of slavery. So Thomas Cabin and the Fugitive Slave Act both do a really good job of starting to turn public opinion in the North away from neutral on slavery to a little more aggressively anti-slavery. Now in 1852, Franklin Pierce runs for president as a Democrat against Winfield Scott, another Mexican-American War general. Franklin Pierce is called a dough face because he's a Northerner who is pro-slavery. Fun fact. Winfield Scott, as a Whig, is personally anti-slavery, but the Whig Party refuses to take a stance on or against expansion of slavery, which is kind of going to fracture the Whigs into Northern and Southern Whigs that want the party to make a stand. It becomes really a campaign of personalities, as neither party, the Democrats or the Republicans, have anything real strong to stand on. Both these guys had served in the war, but Winfield Scott, being anti-slavery, is going to piss off Southern Whigs because of his anti-slave ideology. The Whig Party will start to fracture, and we see in this election map that Franklin Pierce and the Democrats win a substantial majority, leading to a pro-slavery Northern Democrat president in Franklin Pierce. Now, under Pierce, we don't see a ton of important things taking place until a couple of years later. He is the guy that authorizes the Gadsden Purchase, which I mentioned to you in class last week, which is this little sliver of land here in the South, covers modern day Tucson, bear down. The goal of buying this land was to create a Southern Transcontinental Railroad, a railroad that goes sea to sea that would go through Southern states. But Pierce is also going to propose what's called the Ostend Manifesto. The Ostend Manifesto. It's one of the unique things in American history that's proposed and says a lot, but doesn't actually get passed. And it's actually a proposal to either buy Cuba, an island off the coast of Florida, to buy Cuba from Spain for 120 million bucks. It's a Spanish colony still. We're going to buy Cuba, or if they won't sell it to us, we'll do what we did in Mexico and invade Cuba and take it by force. And the goal of doing that is to have another place to spread slavery. Cuba is, of course, a Caribbean island, so it will be great for cash crops like sugar and the like. And it becomes very clear that this proposal to take Cuba is, again, the Democratic manifest destiny motivation that's rooted in spreading slavery. Anti-expansionist and free soil Northerners get furious about this Ostend Manifesto, and that actually kind of shuts it down. But the fact that it's proposed does speak volumes to the perspectives of Democrats at this time. Under Pierce as well, this continuing Commodore Matthew Perry trip to Japan, we negotiate a trade treaty with Shogunate to begin American reach economically elsewhere in the world other than just Europe. So Manifest Destiny is continuing under Pierce, but it's happening other places, right? Economically to Japan, proposal-wise for Cuba. So we're seeing this ideology still carry through our foreign policy, purchasing the Gadsden Purchase in a way that demonstrates the staying power, the continuity of the Manifest Destiny ideology. Now, the place we're going to end is the idiocy that is Stephen Douglas. Now, Stephen Douglas sees this concern about a railroad going through the southern states and says, I don't like that. As I told you a couple minutes ago, Stephen Douglas is part of this new era of leaders who are very sectionally focused, and he's from the North, he's from Illinois, and very ambitious. He really does desire to be president. Look at this guy. His nickname is the Little Magician, and he honestly looks like a little magician, freaking creeper. Now, Stephen Douglas is very, very, very pro what's good for Stephen Douglas. And that's exactly what happens here. Stephen Douglas says, no. I want the national railroad that we're about to build, the transcontinental that cuts across the whole country. I want that railroad to go through Chicago, to go through Illinois, my state, because that'll be good for my state. And that'll be good for my own property values of the properties that I own in Illinois. Now, he proposes a bill in Congress in 1854 to split the rest of that territory we got from the Louisiana Purchase. Right? I'll show you on the map real quick. To split it. Wrong slide, wrong slide, wrong slide. So the rest of this territory here, to split this into two parts, right? Because making a formal incorporated territory into a Kansas and a Nebraska, okay? He proposes splitting this territory, nothing's controversial here yet, into two large chunks, Kansas and Nebraska. And through the Nebraska territory, the railroad could cut through that and connect Chicago with the West Coast and the East Coast, so that Chicago will be a very, very important city in the business and trade and commerce of the country. Now, of course, this is going to piss off the South. It's going to piss off the South because the South wants the railroad to go through the South, which makes sense. So Douglas, in his desire to get the railroad to go through his state, has to propose some sort of a concession to the South to get them to agree, to get the Southern senators to agree to allow this railroad proposal to actually go through Chicago. His proposal is to open those territories that I just showed you to slavery via the same ideology of popular sovereignty that we used in the rest of the Mexican Cession. So to take the territory that was closed to slavery because of the Missouri Compromise, get rid of the Missouri Compromise, reopen that territory to slavery, and let the people that settled there decide for themselves if they wanted slavery or not. Now, in a sense, this proposal would end the Missouri Compromise because these territories that we're speaking of are north of the 3630 line. The South is thrilled. They say, hell yeah, we'll absolutely trade a railroad for the opportunity to expand slavery somewhere else. Stephen Douglas is happy because his state gets his railroad. The abolition movements are furious because slavery now has a new place, a much more convenient and localized place to spread. And this actually is going to lead to enormous violence and conflict in Kansas and elsewhere that we'll save for our live session. So the impact, Douglas wins his railroad. Douglas wins Southern support. The Southerners look at Douglas as a good Democrat that's in favor of the expansion of slavery, even though he's really not in favor of the expansion of slavery. He just used popular sovereignty as a way to get what he wanted. This repeals the Missouri Compromise. This is going to end up ending the Whig Party and the second party system. And it looks a little bit like this. So here's our Compromise of 1850, in which we open these territories to slavery via popular sovereignty. Whoever moves there can decide for themselves as a state if they want it or not. But all of this is still closed to slavery because of the Missouri Compromise. The Kansas-Nebraska Act turns and opens this long closed territory to slavery that had never been closed before, just so the railroad can come right through there. There's Chicago and into the East Coast. So this selfish ambition by Stephen Douglas to get his railroad is actually going to lead us much more quickly to the Civil War, but I'll leave that for our live session. I'm going to have you ponder and respond for your last little reflection on your handout to turn in for today. A quote from transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was anti-Mexican-American War. And in 1846, when the war is going on, he says, it's a good quote, "The United States will conquer Mexico, but it will be as the man swallows arsenic." Arsenic is like a rat poison. It will be as the man swallows arsenic. Mexico will poison us. I want you to respond with what Emerson has to say, and if it's held true ever since the Mexican-American War up to 1854, if it's been true. And then I look forward to having our conversation in our live session. Have a good rest of your day.